Okay, so I wanted to start from showing some of the basic ways of doing text network analysis using InfraNodus. I will actually use an example of the answers that people submitted before inscribing for this webinar. So here they are. I just copied and pasted them into the graph, visualize them here. And what you can see is a visualization of the main topics here. So I'm just going to run through the usual flow that I do when I want to analyze text using the network. So I visualize the text as a graph. We have here 4 main topics. So here we see that people were asking about, obviously, text network analysis of content, then search engine optimization applications, network visualization with keywords, and also finding interesting segments of texts. So this is one aspect that could be interesting here. Another one is the structure analysis of text here. So here it analyzes the structure of the network. It sees how connected or disconnected it is based on some measures like modularity, which is based on community structure, how the most influential words are distributed among the main cluster text, as well as some other measures. I will not get into the technical details now, that shows you how dispersed or how focused this discourse is. And in this case, it's quite dispersed. So you have a lot of different topics. The range is quite wide, and it's not like people want to know about one specific thing. They're actually interested to know about several of them at the same time. I had a question here, how do I mute my mic? I think you just go into the Zoom settings and click the mute button. This is how it's going to work. I think this is why I was also hearing my own voice. So just click mute. Don't need to share the screen now, maybe later when we are actually demonstrating some features that you're interested in. Okay, so we have this graph, and already this representation gives us a good idea of what people are asking about before the webinar, right? So this is analysis of text content, SEO, network visualization, and interesting data segments. We also have the most influential words here, but I find that these topics is something that is most useful to have an overview, because you see all the different segments, all the different elements of the discourse, and you can have a quick overview of how they're related. Also, one interesting thing is that you have this button here that shows or hides the actual statements. So what you can do is to click on the nodes in the graph that you're interested to know more about. So for example, I can zoom in and say, what about revealing networks? So then I can see the specific question filtered that shows in which context these 2 nodes were used. I can also click on the topics like this, and then I can see the same thing. It just selects the nodes simultaneously. If I want to see what people were asking about SEO article tools, I can also click that and see this, right? Then we have the Insight panel, which is kind of like a hidden feature of InfraNodus. Not so many people use it, but it's one of the most interesting ones, actually. What it does is that it takes actually based on the structure of the network, so in this case it's dispersed, it recommends an action that you could do in order to make the discourse more coherent. And what this means is that it identifies structural gaps in the graph. So for instance, it finds which 2 topics communities could be connected, but they're not, and then proposes to ask a research question that would link them together. This feature is also accessible through here, data, statements to link. So it automatically selects for you the 2 statements that you could link with an interesting research question. As you can see here, it shows these 2 clusters on the graph. And here we have the structural gap in between. And this research question could be interesting for us to explore. In this case, for instance, it's something about exporting data in relation to network rewiring visualization, searching using sentences, not only keywords, and how networks would perform. So this can be an interesting way to explore the possible connection of these two subjects together, how you could, for example, export data in order to find some new interesting insight about networks, something that could be proposed, for instance, as a topic for one of the webinars. Now, you also have some panels here that I want to show. For instance, here you have the statistics, which shows the main keywords, their frequency, degree, so all the graph measures are available here. What I find interesting, and again, it's something that is not so easily found or seen, are the measures of conductivity. So for example, here, you can actually click on each column and sort the items based on any measure that you're seeing in this graph. So for example, if I want to see which nodes have the most connection, I click on degree, I will see that, okay, text network analysis. Obviously, most people were asking about this in relation to this webinar. If I click on frequency, it's going to correlate with that. But what happens when I click on between the centrality, sometimes the interesting thing is that it's not always the same order. This is because between the centrality in a graph is a measure of how often a node appears on the shortest path between any two randomly chosen nodes in the network. So what it means, to put it in a more easy to understand way, is that it's the words that connect different topics, different contexts together. So you can also see which words have the most influence in the discourse in this way. Here you have the measure of how locally important a node is. So for example, searching, conceptual visualization. I can also click on the nodes here and see which context they're used in. So for instance, this topic here is something that is quite important, but that doesn't belong to the most popular subjects, let's say. But this statistics panel allows you to discover the hidden topics, the hidden subjects in your text like that, and that can be pretty interesting as well. By the way, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. In the Zoom application, you have the chat button or also Q&A section. Choose whichever you want. I'm monitoring them both, and I'm going to answer the questions as we go. I have a question. What does a structural gap mean? Denote, from Pat. So basically, a structural gap, you can actually look it up. I will write it in the chat. Structural holes. This was a research done several years on social networks. And I think it's called structural holes as a source for innovation or something like this. But basically what they did was to study social networks. And they discovered that when you have a social network, so let's imagine this is a social network, what we're looking at. And let's say that the person text is one very important individual in this network. Analysis is another important individual in this network. But then we also have cluster and we have data. And they're both quite important. They're bigger on the graph, so they have higher between the centrality, but they're not directly connected. So a structural gap is the distance between these two nodes. And what they found in this research was that if you make a link between these two different individuals, you increase the innovative potential of the whole network. So basically, if you were to introduce cluster to data, you would probably create an interesting new partnership between two different groups of people, because cluster is a broker for this group here, and data is a broker for that group here. So by making an introduction, you are creating a potentially interesting collaboration. And what we do with the idea of structural gaps is just applying the same principle, the same metaphor on the discourse. So here we have a text. The most influential terms are visualized as the nodes. They're shown bigger on the graph. The nodes that belong together are indicated with distinct colors. And by detecting the structural gap, so this is exactly what this feature does here when you click on the statements to link, it automatically detects the structural gap. So which two clusters, which two communities of nodes could be linked together, making an assumption and based on the hypothesis that by making this new connection, you're actually introducing something interesting to this discourse, something that could help it evolve. And even if you think of it in a sort of very rational way, you know, right now it's dispersed. So that means that it's not really connected. So if I wanted to introduce a little bit more coherence to this discourse, to make it that one part relates more to the other, it would make sense to make links between those different communities which could have been connected but are not, so by bridging the structural gaps. And this is exactly what the insight feature proposes here. Action advice, make connection. And it's describing what I just said, that this discourse structure is dispersed to increase coherency. You can ask a research question that would help you develop the clusters below and make connections between them. Okay, I will look at the other questions. The word co-occurrence matrix, is it possible to export the word co-occurrence matrix? So right now you only have this data. It's just a list of keywords with all the stats, which you can export as CSV or Excel. Word co-occurrence matrix. So you have an export here. If you click, I think there's quite a few, but for instance, if you click on CSV, what you see is actually a CSV file with all the connections between all the different nodes. So this is one way to export this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it actually into the stats as a button, because it's true, it would make a lot of sense to give a much more accessible way of exporting this rather than going in the menu. You also have a few other export options here. Like if you just click on export, it exports a JSON file, which also contains information about the connections between the different words. And you also have just a standard text export. So you export all the text, which we can find here. And there's a few other options. You can explore it. For example, if you export it as a GXF file, someone was asking about exports, you can, in fact, then use any other software like Jeffy to visualize it in high resolution, for example, and to be able to get some additional insights into your data. Okay. Do you have any formal scientific paper or communication explaining the maths underpinning your platform, or other documents to read with some details? Yes, if you go on the front page of InfraNodus, David, you can scroll down, and in the section about methodology, I think it's called how it works. I'm actually going to show you now rather than just talking about it. So if you go on infranodus.com and then you click how it works, here it explains in a few details, you know, just some basics. Then you have links to these two papers here. So the most recent one is from 2019, InfraNodus generating insight using text network analysis. It explains everything. If you have some background in network science, I think it's going to be sufficient. It's quite a short paper, so this is quite good to read first. And if you want to go more in depth, just find this paper on Google Scholar, and you will see all the precise information that you need, all the technical details. Okay, I have another question. Structural holes, structural gaps, papers, useful features of the tool for SEOs out there. Okay, yeah, actually, this was my plan to move further with SEO, because I received quite a lot of questions about this. And actually, I have to say that SEO, search engine optimization, is a subject that is not only interesting for the people working in marketing, but in fact for everyone who's working with any sort of information, researchers, writers, students, just people who are curious, because what SEO does, just for those who don't know what this term means, is that you're looking at how to put your content at the top of the search results in Google mainly, or on other search engines, maybe on Amazon or YouTube and so on. And in order to do this, you need to see first what discourse already exists out there. And also you need to understand what people are searching for. And then you put this information, this data together, and you will be able to then have a better understanding of what people actually need. And then based on that, you can run a marketing campaign, or you can also write interesting content that will be in demand and that will cover all the subjects, all the topics that people are interested in. And there are more advanced ways of doing it, like, for instance, finding the niche or the keywords which are not utilized by your competitors and targeting them so that you have higher chances of appearing in search results. I will just demonstrate some features and then we can go more in depth, in detail. So for example, here, we were working with the graph of the answers that you all submitted when you signed up for this webinar. I asked you what you would be interested in discussing, text network analysis, right? So for instance, let's see how we can move on and get some interesting insights about this topic using search engine optimization. And then I'm also going to touch how this topic of how you can compare graphs together, which can be interesting for some people as well. So here I go into the Google applications on the main page, and let's say I type in text network analysis. And what it does now is that it imports Google search results for this search query, those snippets of texts and titles that you can see when you search in Google. And then it visualizes them as a network. You can read more about how the algorithm works, but generally it's based on co-occurrence. So it doesn't do any semantic analysis. It just looks at the co-occurrence of words, but this already gives you a very good understanding of what the main subjects are, how they're connected, what are the main topics, you know, how you could contribute in an interesting way to this discourse, for instance, and so on. So here we have a visualization of Google search results for text network analysis, which we can see here on the right. We can see that mainly people are interested in this topic, identify, visualize words. So I click that subject and then I can see also which context it's used, what are the search results that have the highest concentration of this term. So for example, here is one, comparative discourse analysis. Okay. By the way, I think it's a video that I made using InfraNodus. So as you can see, I already use the tool quite a lot for my own SEO. Then topic mining, semantic topic mining. So here is something about semantic analysis, topic modeling. So this already gives us an idea, okay, if we are interested in the subject of text network analysis, we should also touch upon the subject of topic mining, semantic network analysis, and so on. So we can already start saving this information. By the way, there is a feature here that allows you to do this. So when you find the interesting keywords, you can just click on interpret and then save, and it's going to save it into a separate graph, which you can then use as a reference for your stored ideas. This is another hidden feature, by the way, that people are not using that much, but it's a pretty useful one. Then we have another cluster, related study and literature. So for example, here, if we click on related study literature, we see the search results that contain these terms, even the scientific papers in this case. For example, if I click on that, I will be able to see this particular research, which is dealing with the subject. And we have visual methods. So here is something I wanted to also show you that can be quite interesting for you. Let's say here we have a word which is not relevant. August, actually, it's because it's from search results. So what you can easily do with the graph, and this is some really powerful features, that you can select this word and simply add it into the stop words here. So it's not shown anymore on the graph. Let's say that you were aware that any search and text analysis would show you mining and topic, semantic. You know all this already. So just delete this from the graph and you will be able to see behind what's actually hiding behind these topics. And this is very interesting as well. You see here we are discovering social analysis, for instance. Okay, so we see that there is some correlation. Literature, related literature, research, and so on. So you see this kind of interaction with the graph where I select the nodes that I already discovered, delete them, and move on, allows me to see very interesting patterns that I would not normally see. When I click these nodes back, they are returning back into the graph. Okay, so for instance, now I'm just going to delete text network analysis because this was the search, and then we see the results. Okay, so to continue talking about search engine optimization, and now we get to maybe the most interesting part of it. It's the special SEO app that you have in InfraNodus. So for instance, what we did just before was to visualize Google search results. What the SEO app does is that it doesn't only visualize Google search results, it also visualizes what people are searching for in relation to this query and then compares these two graphs together. So this can also be interesting for the people who would want to use InfraNodus for comparative analysis. So I type in here text network analysis, click go. And what happens now is that it imports Google search results for this query, as well as the search requests that people are using in relation to the search query. So for example, here you see the keyword ideas that we have, if we have any from this visualization. Then we have a separate graph for top 40 search results, and here the graph is filtered. So this is what we've seen just before already. And then if you click on popular search queries, you see another graph of what kind of search queries people use to in relation to this text network visualization search query. And here we see that it's not a lot, but it's some graph visualization. So text network analysis, people who search for text network analysis also search for graph visualization. This can be interesting for us. We can actually select these words, add them into the search ideas. As you can see, it automatically adapts to whatever application you're using it for. So before we had the interpret feature, which, by the way, to answer the question, I will talk about it later. And here you have just a list of ideas, which are then shown here, which you can refer to as you find the keywords that you need. One really interesting feature here is the missing keywords. So for example, in this case, it's actually shown here, missing content. It shows to you what people search for but do not find. And what it does is that it basically compares the two graphs. It compares the graph of the search queries that people use when they search for text network analysis. And then it looks at what exists in that graph that doesn't exist in the graph of search results. So some kind of diff feature for texts or graphs. And here we see that what people are searching for but they don't find is graph, Python, directed. So somehow from this we can see that it's a slightly specific use of text network analysis in JavaScript, in Python, for visualization and also for analyzing data. So if we were to write content, or if we were interested to infiltrate this discourse, we know that if we focus on a more technical programming aspect of this whole question of text network analysis, let's say how to do it with Python or JavaScript libraries that allow you to do this and so on, then we are quite likely to fulfill a niche between the demand and supply, which is not yet catered to. So this can be a really great way to do marketing research. And also just to get yourself some ideas for the texts you're writing. Because for instance, if I want to write about a certain subject, it could be very interesting for me to know what people are searching for, but what they do not find, and then focus my efforts on this gap to fulfill the gap that is missing. This is actually what InfraNodus is somehow all about, allowing you to see this hidden parts of any data which you would not normally find. I will answer some more questions now. So for example, yeah, let's go back to the interpret feature. This is an interesting one. So here we have the Google search results. And basically the interpret feature is just something that allows you to start building a new graph on top of this one. I will show you how it works. So for instance, let's say I look at this graph of search results for text network analysis, and I see, okay, it's interesting, social analysis. So I can click here. I can even make some comments. So work on an application that could be used to analyze social networks. I save this. Then I move on, and let's say I add also create visualizations and so on. And then I'm going to show you what happens. What happens here is that it creates a special metagraph, which has all your ideas superimposed on the original graph. So I will actually show you how it works also in this one. So if you click on the metagraph, you can actually see how much of the existing discourse you covered with your new ideas. So for instance, I already talked about social analysis, and I talked about topic mining. Okay, but let's say I didn't mention anything about literature. So yeah, that was a good idea, that you could use this tool, use InfraNodus to find related literature. Then I add it into the graph. And as you see, these nodes become gray. So it shows me how much of the existing discourse I covered with my new ideas. And this can be a very interesting way to somehow make sure that you covered all the aspects of any data set that you are working with. Okay, some more questions. Is there any guide to import a file from Excel? So yes, on the Nodus Labs website, there is an article on importing CSV data. So I'm just going to leave the link in the chat. If you then go to case studies, I think it's one of the first 4 articles. And this explains in detail how to import this data. I have to admit the process is not very streamlined yet. Like you can do it, but it's not the most user-friendly process. And one of the features I'm working on is to make it easier, really, just so that you have some kind of visual editor that allows you which parts of the file you want to choose. But in general, the way that it works is that you select, so if you go to applications, you click on advanced import options, and then you select the file that you're interested in, choose CSV. And here you can add some data. Like for instance, you can say that that you want to only import data from certain columns. So for example, if I was analyzing a CSV file with the patterns of movement from one destination to another, I would just write from to, right? So then it would import only the data from these 2 columns and make connections between them. There is more features, like for instance, you could also separate the data into different graphs, or you could also choose different separator for your CSV file. So basically, this is how you would import data from Excel. You would just save your Excel file as a CSV, and then use this import feature to sort of select the kind of algorithm you would like to apply in analyzing this file, and how do you actually want to represent it. Because if you have a CSV file, everyone has different needs. Some people just want to visualize a CSV file with customer feedback, then they just need to analyze only one column. And this then would be the best way to export the file just as one column, and then import the whole file into InfraNodus to see the general sentiment, just like I showed earlier. But if it's some more complex data like correlations between ingredients, for example, or you want to make two graphs, one graph with the positive sentiment, another graph with the negative sentiment. So then you could use these extra settings to achieve what you want to do. Okay, now, okay, so the person who asked about the interpret feature, he also said there was one I sent you directly. It would be interesting to see how you go about it if you feel more. James, could you maybe send it to me again in the chat, or just to clarify a little bit what do you mean? Because then we could work on your use case. By the way, also, if you have some data sets you would like to try, let me know. Another question we have is how to analyze a number of papers in a PDF format. So this is something which can be done, again, using this import feature here. If you go to advanced import, then you select PDF and you upload the file. The thing is that it's not really well suited yet for big texts. So I would not recommend you to use the tool now if you want to analyze, I don't know, 100 PDF documents, because you're facing one huge problem with graphs, actually, is that as soon as you have a lot of information, the words just become all connected to each other. So if you're dealing with a big text, the level of connectivity is such that it becomes really hard to interpret the data. So everything becomes connected to everything else. The community structure is not so pronounced, and so on. So I would say that it works best for short snippets of text. So Tiago, to answer your questions, you could basically maybe take abstracts of those papers. Let's say if you're talking about scientific papers, you could take the abstracts of those papers, add them into the graph and visualize them to see what the general sentiment is, what they're talking about. You could also use the titles of papers and make another graph with it, and so on. So this is something that you could do using the tool. If you need to have a very precise analysis of 200 PDF documents, this tool is not good for that at this point of time. I'm actually working on a Python version that would allow for this kind of processing and basically make it open source. So you could download it on your machine and run it for a few days with your data set and then get the results, because you could still use the method to get the topics, but the visualization would not be so readable. So again, as a kind of visual tool, I would not recommend using it for this anyway, but to use network analysis to detect the main topics and the relations between them, yes. And this is in the pipeline, and I think it's going to come out as a Python open source script rather than as part of InfraNodus feature. Is there a way to measure a change in semantic networks over time? For example, after administering the same interview to an individual at 2 time points? Yes, this is a great question from Jonah. Yeah, I mean, what I can say is that you can, in fact, maybe I'm just going to show it right now. So now I'm on my local version of InfraNodus, and I'm going to show you a new feature that I'm building right now for Twitter sentiment analysis. So this could also be interesting for the people who are interested in analyzing Twitter, but this will answer your question, Jonah. And this will show also how you could analyze the evolution of network and time. Actually, this kind of analysis is something that can be super interesting, because using that, you can, for instance, not only see how the discourse evolved, but you can also detect events in networks. So if you're analyzing how sentiment about a certain product changed over time, this is a great way to do that. And you could also detect some new emerging events inside the network. So for example, you could just trace certain discourse and set up a notification that you would be informed when something structurally really different starts to happen. And network analysis would be great for that. So this is a feature I'm working on right now. I'm going to show you now how it can work on Twitter. So let's talk about coronavirus because it's a huge subject now. So we will make a visualization of what the Twitter is talking about in relation to coronavirus right now. So I'm above the rate limit with Twitter. Unfortunately, this had to happen exactly when I'm demonstrating the tool. So then we will make plan B. I will just show you how it works using the data set I already should have. Okay. So let's say I will probably re-log in here. Sorry for this little break, but just need to figure out what would be the best way to do that. Okay, so let's see, maybe I have this data. Okay. Okay, so for example, here is a visualization of the tweets that were made in the last 24 hours on the subject of coronavirus. There's quite a lot of them. And you can see that here people are concerned with people, country, health, which is like one aspect. Then death cases in China. So people are asking and questioning whether the death rates are being reported correctly. Also, this huge subject of people having to stay home and the impact on businesses, and the relief bill in Senate. So as you can see, it actually gives you a very quick idea of what the discourse is about. And this is how you could use it for sentiment analysis of Twitter data once I fix the rate limiting issue and roll out this new update soon. Also, to answer your question, Jonas, so here, a new feature that's coming in the next release of InfraNodus, I think within the next week, is this emergent topics. And what it does is that it takes a fraction of the most recent additions to this graph. It finds the most frequent words inside, and then it removes the ones that are already most influential and keeps the ones that have influence, but that are not in the list of the most influential terms. So you can see what are the topics that are emerging from this graph. By the way, Twitter started to work again. So maybe I'm just going to load this and show you how the live update actually works. You see, so for example, here I have a graph. It's also a visualization of coronavirus. And now the live update feature is working on. And what it does is that it polls Twitter, in this case, every minute. And it's visualizing the results, the new results that appear. So for example, once we have something new appearing in relation to this discourse, it's going to be visualized on this graph and added into this visualization. In this case, it was something 35 minutes ago. I have to explain why it's like this, because when you import data from Twitter, you can also import the most recent stuff. So for example, I can deactivate this. I will show you how this works. And deactivate that. Okay, so let's say okay. I'm going to demonstrate it now. Hopefully it's going to work. So to answer the question of Jonah, how to actually track the discourse in time or track a change in semantic networks in time, this would be one way, that you use this live feature and you set it up to update every certain period of time, and then you can trace it live. Or what I'm going to add as a feature is that you would be able to choose that every new import of data is saved as a separate graph. So for example, if you have the data from Twitter every hour, you save it as a new graph. If you're talking about interviews, how it was in your case, you would just be saving the interviews as two separate graphs. And then what you could do is to go into the see all graphs feature. So this would be one way, and see how all of the graphs that you imported connect. So for example, here the squares are the graphs and the nodes are the words. So you can see that, for instance, here we have quite a few different graphs that belong to one side of the network, and here another set of graphs that belong to another side of the network. Let's see if I wanted to only visualize information about the answers I got for the webinar participation and compare it to the Google search results. So this can be maybe interesting for your question as well. How can you compare two graphs together? So here is the feature, here and here, that allows you to compare two different graphs and see which intersections they have and how they're different. So for instance, if I click on the intersection and then I choose another graph, here it's the Google search results, I will see highlighted with the blue nodes, with the colored nodes, which terms they have in common. So what people asked for and what is found on the internet in relation to text network analysis has these terms, has these common terms: semantic, mining, topic, article, tool, base, data, and so on. So you have this. What you could also do is to see the difference. So for example, you click here on this difference button and then click on the context you want to compare it with. Then you can go to Insight, and here it shows you missing in the current graph. So what exists in Google search results, but not in the topics that people submitted for the webinar. And I can delete the most obvious nodes to look behind. So I see that, okay, social analysis. So for example, when people search for text network analysis, they find results for social network analysis, but almost no one asked about this in the questions for the webinar. And this is how you can compare two different interviews together. You could, for example, see which questions were missing from the more, which answers were missing from a more recent interview. Or you can also see what were in common between them and so on. So these are the two buttons that you can use on the left in the menu. Just select one context, click this, and then choose what you want to compare it with. So here it's the same thing, but in reverse. What was in the webinar topics, but not in Google search results. Again, if I want to see this nodes, book, cluster, content, finding, if I want to see them clear, I can delete the most influential ones from the graph. So I can kind of zoom in. Okay, book page. So I can click this and see what were people asking in the webinar that doesn't exist yet in the Google search results. Book content analysis. So probably it means it's not a very popular request, but nevertheless, this was specific to the webinar, so it could be interesting to address it. By the way, this I already talked about when I said that you can import the snippets of research articles or titles, you could actually do exactly this. You know, you take the book contents, just copy and paste it into the graph. So for this, you can just use the very standard application here, generate insight or add a new text, whichever you prefer, you know, and you just copy and paste the data here and click save, and then it's going to visualize them as a graph. So this would be the best way to analyze topics. Now, I'm going to answer more questions now. So, the original question, market research, business systems consultant. Okay, so James was asking about marketing research and SEO. And his question was to do a research on business systems, business operation consultant. I'm looking for both ways to find the gaps in content around the topic and in terms of market research for positioning and identifying where the gaps are in terms of the service people are looking for but not finding. And then I will read another question also. Have you considered adding other network algorithms that reduce the data? For example, Pathfinder networks based on Dijkstra algorithm or nearest neighbor analysis? Yes, I did consider this. I just need to choose between features based on what people are using and what they demand. But if this is a request you have, the best way would be for me if you send me your particular use case, because then I would be able to see how to integrate this feature in a way that would be most useful for you. So if you told me what you wanted to use it for, I would be very happy to implement this as a feature, because some things are very easy to add. You know, if it's just about adding more network algorithms, the libraries I use, like Cityscape and Graphology, they allow to do that. So if it exists, it's just a question of several hours. If it's something more complex, we have to see. But it's very important for me to know your use case. This is why I always ask the users to tell me more about what they're doing, because I'm building this tool for you and together with you. And if you tell me what you use it for, this will help me see how to integrate the features in terms of a better UI and so on. So please send me more information about your use case. This email here or that one here, and tell me why exactly you wanted to have these measures so I can see how to integrate them. Also, Russell is asking, how do I turn a phrase into just one item? Great. Yeah, this is a very good question. For example, the phrase might be coronavirus. I might want that to be just one node rather than two, because it is really just one concept. I agree with you. So somehow InfraNodus already kind of automatically does it. This is the nature of network analysis. Yes, you have separate nodes here, but the terms that tend to co-occur together, they will be closer to each other on the graph. So for example, here, positive test, you see, tested positive. So again, tested positive. So you see that it automatically already aligns them next to each other. So you already have this data in the graph, as well as when you get the visualization of this data and the analysis of the topics. However, what you're saying is true. Sometimes you want to detect also specific entities and you want to make your analysis a bit more precise. So at the moment, you have a way to do that if you pre-process your data. So for instance, let's say I'm adding a new graph, just gonna call it test 42, random. And then let's say I want to make a node that would be called coronavirus. So here is another very interesting feature that not so many people are using, another hidden feature, coronavirus. So you can use hashtags to add nodes very quickly. And for instance, here I say coronavirus is pandemic. Yeah. And then you see you have a node coronavirus pandemic. Then you can say coronavirus is a virus. And then you can also say Ebola is a virus. And here you see you're building a graph very quickly. So you can also use this for brainstorming. Someone was asking about brainstorming. This is exactly how you would do that. You know, you would just type in these nodes and build your own networks very quickly, much faster than using visual tools like Graph Commons, for instance, because you have to click, create a node, choose its type, and so on. Here you can really quickly, rapidly prototype any sort of ideas is taking over the world, also is causing a toll on the health system, another phrase you see. So then here, world health system, a node, which is a phrase. Now, I think one of the next features will be automatic entity extraction. So you would be also able to do the same with some external data, like when you import stuff from Twitter or Google, for example. You know, so this is something that is in the works and something that's going to be realized soon. The question is, what would be the basis for it to choose? Maybe it's going to be bigrams, maybe it's going to be some external API for entity detection, we will see. But yes, it's going to be implemented into the tool, but right now you can use it this way. Another thing I wanted to show in relation to this is that in the settings panel, you have this really great functionality where you can choose. So what happens to mentions? So right now I was using hashtags to create nodes. Automatically what happens is that if there is a hashtag in a statement, it's going to be interpreted as a node and all the text will be ignored. You can also switch this off, by the way. So you can say that both hashtags and words here visualize in the graph. So that means that both hashtags and words will be visualized. Default behavior is that if there are hashtags, it will only be them visualized. If none, then also all the words. You can also say that only hashtags ignore words and so on. But here we will keep it where we were because it's nice to visualize only hashtags and not to visualize words if we want to build these graphs with the descriptions of the connections. But here what I want to show is that you can also use mentions. So what happens to the mention sign? Right now it's set by default left as they are. But what you can also say is that it's going to be removed and each hashtag or word connected to mention will be connected to it, but not to each other. And what does it allow you to do? I will show you now using this graph again. This allows you to build graphs even faster. So let's say that we wanted to make a connection between virus, world, pandemic, and health system. If we use hashtags, we would have to type it in every time, only these binary connections. So what we can do is to type in virus, pandemic, world, and coronavirus. This is already connected, by the way, but let's say that we connect it to health system. And when we do this, you see this node becomes connected to all the different nodes. So this is some interesting setting for you to play around with and to be able to rapid prototype graphs and to brainstorm ideas using mentions and hashtags. Okay. A question from Irfan. SERPs in CH are different to Google SERPs in UK. Right, so the location based for sure. I mean, right now we're working, I think, with the US data. And definitely you will be able to select the Google country, region, and language from which the user is. When you do the query, this is something in the works for sure. Verbs in non-textual data source. Vladimir, can you explain to me what you mean by verbs? Not familiar with this term. Maybe it's something obvious, I don't know, but it will be nice if you can explain it to me. When pasting a text, a question from David, does it make any difference to have one single block or several paragraphs? So yeah, it actually makes difference because if you paste a text and it's not separated into paragraphs, it will just scan through the whole text. So the whole sequence of words will be connected, right? So for example, let's say I will actually demonstrate it using a text that I wrote. So I have a text here. Just will take me a short moment. Okay, so I'm adding a new text, so I can go into the applications, add a new text. So look, if I just import one text, and let's say here's a paragraph break, but I erase it, the word results will be connected to instance. So there will not be a break, and the algorithm will continuously scan through the whole text, actually. Whereas if I make a paragraph break, what happens is that the algorithm stops at every paragraph break, so it doesn't connect the word results to instance intentions. And this is pretty useful because usually paragraph indicates a beginning of the new idea. So you don't want the last word from the previous idea to be connected to the next one. However, if this is something you would like to do, you can just delete these gaps by search and replace feature, for instance, and visualize it as a graph. But here I'm going to visualize them separately. So I add them into the graph, and you see we have two paragraphs here. Easy. Okay, another question from Dave. When I used to analyze Twitter, is there a way to adjust the settings to use hashtag? Right, yeah, I think maybe it was you writing to me about this. So yes, for sure, I'm working on that. I just needed to finish first with this live update feature, and to also sort out the question of rate limiting, but this is definitely on my to-do list to do the dollar hashtag, so you could use the stocks symbols and analyze them. Yes, it's going to be implemented soon. As I'm working on Twitter, to give you a real time frame, I think maximum a couple of weeks. When building a graph on hashtags, what are the non-hashtag words used for? So when you're building a graph with hashtags, you're just describing the connections with the normal words. So for example, you see, I can just type in coronavirus is a virus. Actually, no, I can type in coronavirus virus. This just makes a connection between them. Let's say coronavirus, and I want to make a connection COVID-19. Yeah. So we have coronavirus and the COVID connection here. But sometimes I want to describe a connection. So this is where I use normal text. I can just say COVID is another name for coronavirus, or actually it's even the name of the disease that happens as a result of being infected. So I can add a really long description, add this into the graph, and what's really nice is that then when you click on coronavirus and on COVID, you will be able to see this description, so you will know what this connection actually means. So it's a way of adding a connection. In fact, every text snippet is a description of the connection in this case, and this is how you could use that. How changing the advanced setting does affect the existing graphs. Can you explain to me what you mean by advanced setting, please? Okay, Vladimir is also asking about serving verbs serve as a base for the relationship. You mean verbs like a type of speech? No, I mean you actually the way the relations are created in InfraNodus is exactly how I showed it to you now. That when the words are used next to each other, there's a connection between them. So, for example, if I type in apples and oranges are fruits. See, I'm not using hashtags, so they will all be processed except for the stop words like and are. And what you get is a triangle because these words are used next to each other. Apple, orange, fruit. If you have a longer sentence like papaya is also a fruit that grows in the tropical islands like Bali, for example, the word Bali is quite far away from papaya, so it's not going to be connected to it directly. So it also depends on the proximity of the words used. I hope this gives you an idea of how the algorithm functions. So it's not the verbs, it's actually all the words that are used to create relations. What kind of consideration or even prototyping have you done in regards to semantic network visualization as it pertains to the process of writing research or even note-taking? So we're actually already dealing with a semantic network. What InfraNodus doesn't do, it doesn't try to interpret the data for you. It just creates a very formal network visualization of your text to show you what would happen if you represented this text as a graph, where the words are the nodes and the co-occurrences are the connections between them. And then based on that, based on the algorithms from graph theory, it identifies the main topics, how they're related, and so on. So to answer your question, I'm doing prototyping in consideration all the time. So for example, I have a new text here that I'm writing about. It's about physical practice, body-mind practice, embodied practice we're working on in the frame of Nodus Labs, also called 8OS. And let's say I want to get some new ideas. It's a text which is not finished, more like a collection of text and ideas, you know. And I add it into the graph. This already allows me to come back to it very quickly, because the last time I wrote it was about 2 weeks ago, so I don't really remember exactly what it's about. So I can see that it's dealing with the notion of tension, language systems. I can see the main topics. I can see which terms were used next to each other and in which context. Tension, outcome, objective, basic block body. I can also generate insights. So I can see which 2 different topics could be connected to generate new ideas, and so on. So this is the kind of way that the text network analysis is used here. It's to detect the main topics using the framework of graphs and to get some additional insights about your text, which would not be available to you with traditional tools. Also, what kind of, should I introduce verbs into the database to connect rows and lines in the CIS file? I don't really understand the question. Sorry, it would be nice if you elaborated. Jean-Louis is saying need to go. Thanks for the presentation. Thank you. Okay, and then, all right. Is the market research use case not something you would use InfraNodus for? Or shall I mail you with more context? James, for sure, yeah. I mean, this is very interesting. I think you should definitely send me, you were asking about business systems and business operation consultant. So we can do it right now. I think to give you a very detailed answer, it's better if you write me an email and we can set up a one-on-one webinar just to work with your use case, because I can show it in a superficial way now, can be maybe interesting for the others, but I think if you really want to kind of like go in depth on that subject, we need a little bit more time and specificity. But in general, I would say that you would use the same procedure. You want to know more about business systems, so you add it into the graph. Oops, something happened. I think it's my local version, which is still not released, getting a bit buggy. Okay, again, so business systems. I actually wonder if, yeah, I probably broke the SEO feature in the local version, so I'm going to use the online, the cloud one. Okay. It's good you're helping me discover the bugs in the new unreleased one. Business systems, right? So I type this in here, I visualize it as a graph, and what happens next is that it has a feature that allows you to add more content inside. So for example, let's say you asked the business systems and then you also said business operations consultant. So what I'm going to do now is that I can actually import more search results into the same graph for business operation consultants. I'm going to do that. And then it's going to add the search results for this query into this very graph. And while it's thinking and we're doing this, text processing settings from David. And you were asking about, yeah, so David, yeah, very simple question. You asked, no, it doesn't affect the existing graphs. It only affects how you're working with the new graphs. And when you switch off the setting, then it comes back to normal somehow. So yeah, it's not going to affect anything in any way. Oh, now we have a database error. Okay. So yeah, just use the standard text processing settings, and when you need to switch, you switch to the hashtags mentions, and then you can switch back, and it's not going to affect your graph in any way. So yeah, this is pretty easy to use. Okay, I'm just going to, while we wait for the import, just go through more questions so everyone feels like, oh yeah, Philippe Wardenbroek. I liked, I think you wrote that you want to be surprised when I asked you what was your request in relation to this. Yeah, 8OS is, I mean, I'll actually put a link here so you know what this is after, you can take a look at it. But in general, it's a bodymind operating system, and this document, let's check this document. I'm gonna launch the local version again because I think it was there. And in the meanwhile, James, sorry, I was finding your message. I didn't forget about you. I'm just waiting until the data import happens. Yes. Okay, here we go. So maybe what I'm going to do, because I think James is waiting for quite a long time. Philippe, I'll just take a couple of minutes to finish answering James' question, because I've been answering it for a while now. So I'm just going to finish with that, and then we can go into the 8OS text. So James, here is our text visualized as a graph. We have business system. So again, for this use case, what I would do is, let's say that we start from business systems and we just want to see what people are searching for. So I'm just going to run through how I would use this graph. Yeah. And then if you would like more details, then we can talk about it separately. First, you make the import of this data. You visualize it as a graph. You see all the data here. So I would look first into what people actually find when they search for business systems. So we see that the topic of service, copier, printer, this is one thing. So you actually see that if you use these search terms, it's not so much about consultancy. It's more about really practical stuff like finding the nearest copying service. So this is also something to consider. I would say that these sort of results will interfere into your marketing efforts. So probably it makes sense to be a bit more specific. Then office equipment supply, okay, fax, and only a small cluster of technology solutions, productivity for business operations. So I think this is something closer to you. So I would say my first insight from analyzing Google search results on this search query is that there's a lot of stuff about the things that don't really relate to your niche. So that means that you probably would need to address some other terms or be more specific about it, how you actually already were, because you wrote to me business operations consultant. So this is something more precise, which we'll switch to in a second. Then I would look into the list of more most popular search queries. And here I see that people actually search for what you are talking about, making business processes more effective, but they don't find it. So on the other hand, it could indicate that if you use business system as the keywords in whatever content or marketing efforts that you are creating, this could be an interesting niche, because it might be also that people search for what you are offering using these terms, and all they find are the copying services and online fax machines and so on. But actually what they need is to explore more about the processes and how to make business processes more effective. So that shows you that, okay, there is actually a demand for this, even in relation to this search query. And the results already appear in the search results, because if we click on missing keywords and then we go on missing content here, we see that they actually both appear. But what they don't find for when they search for something is example. So let's see, business system example, examples of business systems, and also PDF, how to create a business system PDF. So let's say if you had a website and you put up some PDF, which you maybe offer for the people who sign up or who sign up for a newsletter or a webinar. If you offer a free PDF, this could attract people through search engines as well. And then let's see, what about small operating? Also for small businesses. So this is a niche which is unfulfilled, and you could target that. Then you would repeat the same process for business operation consultant. Again, visualize the data as a graph, see what people search for, what they actually find. Let's see if there is. Yeah, sometimes the problem is that when you make a specific query, there is no data on the popular search queries in relation to this, how it is in this case. So for instance, here it was pretty specific. So you could make it a bit more general. Let's say business operations, and make another search, or business consultant. Let's say this business consultant. So I'm just demonstrating to you the workflow, so you can see how it functions, and then you can try it out yourself and play with your own data. Okay, so you see that what people are searching for but they don't find, just click on the missing keywords directly. You have them in the missing content here in the analytics panel. Top development, business development consultant, job description. Okay, New York also is something that is being searched. Jobs, online. This is not exactly your niche. Top consulting, not really. So for instance, this would indicate that maybe this is not such a search query to go into, and that maybe you would want to explore some other synonyms, which, by the way, you can also find from here. So for example, analyst management, or consulting, professional consulting, and so on. So then you can accumulate these keywords, add them as search ideas, and they will be saved here. And after this, when you load this graph again, you will be able to see this list of the related keywords and how you cover the existing discourse. And this would be the workflow that you could do. But again, as I said, I will be very happy to show you how that works. Let's just make a date on another day, and I'm going to demonstrate. So Philippe, now I'm going to talk about EightOS and this EightOS document text, how that would work. So I'm going to log in on my local version, because I'm also curious to find what else I need to fix there before launching it into the world. So for example, I will add a new text. Let's say here, just use a normal app. I'm going to copy and paste the text. So this text, EightOS is another project of Nodus Labs. So one project is InfraNodus and text network analysis. Another project is the educational technologies, and specifically how you could use embodied experience to understand abstract concepts. And one of the projects in this realm is what we call EightOS, which is bodymind operating system, which is a physical practice where we study very complex notions and concepts like networks, non-equilibrium dynamics, metastability, adaptation, resilience, propagation, all these words that we use a lot, but that we sometimes don't even really know what they mean, you know, and we try to create ways how you could explain them in a very embodied, very tangible way through interactive exercises, to give new ideas about how you could be resilient, you know, even on the physical level, but also on the level of organization or on the level of society and so on. So one of the workshops, for instance, was introducing the concepts from network science, but to a group of participants who were playing a very simple game with chairs where they were moving around and trying to understand what it means to be more influential in the network, what it means to belong to a cluster, what it's like to, you know, to, let's say, make a new link and so on. So this is just to give you a general idea. And this particular text was actually, it was calling about, yeah, it was making this connection between neuroscience and waves and tension, and how tension is a wave, and how you can use this notion of tension, wave, energy transmission to understand something about this phenomena, and specifically how to deal with the escalation and de-escalation, which could then be applied in the context of conflict resolution, or even when analyzing political events. Because when you look at politics, a lot of times it's about this interplay of escalation, de-escalation. Even if you think of the way processes evolve in everyday life, it also goes through cycles. There's a period of growth, then it saturates, then there is some kind of release, which is followed by a crisis, but the crisis is a good moment for reorganizing and then building up again. So I was kind of writing some ideas about this in this text. It is not yet finished, but I think the main idea here, which I'm reminded of through this graph, is that tension was the central topic. And the way that I would usually do actually is to first just look into the main topics identified in the graph. So for example, create, procedure, action. Okay, see which context I used every topic in. Okay, periods, economical development, so on. Also look at the emergent topics. So this is what I was talking about in the end. The notion of placebo, for example, came in. So it reminds me that I wanted to integrate this idea that if you believe in something, it's more likely to happen. And then when I click on the insight, it shows me which two topics I could relate together. Can also be seen here, statements to link. So one is about tension as the basic building block, and then economical social cycles. So it proposes me to write more in the direction of making the connection between these two topics and bridging the structural gap. So this would be somehow like a very basic workflow when you're writing a new text. You can even continue writing it here. So I can remind myself, make a connection between the idea of tension, release, economical cycles, and even seasons. Why not save it into the graph? It's going to be added. I'm going to continue writing my text actually in this edit field. So you can actually use it as a tool to write your text, and then you can export your text here. Copy and paste it somewhere, and so on. Okay. Let's see. All right, I think we've done already 1 hour and a half actually, so I'm going to stop here now, but I will be very happy to do this again in around a week's time. So please, you can always contact me. I'm going to leave you the email here. And also if you use Messenger, like Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, you can also write me there directly. With some feedback, suggestions, questions, if you want to work on your use case. Because as I said before, for me, the most interesting part of this work is to talk to the people who use the tool, to know what they're using it for, how it works for them, what features they would like to have, what they find useful, what annoys them, and so on. So please don't hesitate to write me back and to let me know what you would like to have integrated. And if you have any questions about usability, or if you just want me to demonstrate how I use the tool, I'll be happy to show it to you. And thank you very much, everyone, for your support and for being here, for spending this time together, for your very interesting questions. And let's stay in touch. Soon, as I said, we will have a new feature rolling out with the live updates of Twitter. So I'm working on it now, on sentiment analysis, especially because now we have a lot of news coming in relation to the coronavirus. So if you have any suggestions, ideas in relation to that, what you would like to see, please also let me know. What I would like to do is not to just make another dashboard that shows what is already obvious, but somehow something that would allow us to peek beyond the obvious, maybe the emergent topics or what no one is talking about, but that is still important. So if you have some ideas, about how this could be implemented, or maybe you already thought about this and somehow it resonates with something you thought about already, please let me know also, because I'm in the process of building this right now, which will then also be extrapolated to news as well. So it's going to work for RSS feeds. You know, if you have any ideas for what kind of tool you would like to have in a situation like we're having now that would analyze news and social discourse, what kind of insights you would like to get, I would be really interested to know. And yes, Pat, it's recorded. It's being streamed on Nodus Labs YouTube channel. I'm just going to send you a link to that YouTube channel. The only problem is that at the beginning I couldn't figure out how Zoom works, because to be honest, it's the first time I use it as a platform for webcasting. I used it before just to do one-on-one seminars. So at the beginning, it's going to be a bit slow, but I think if you put it 1.5 speed, it's going to be fine. So I will send you the link to the channel in a second. Yep. Here is the link to the channel, and here's the link to the actual video of this seminar. I don't know if it saved the chat, but I'm going to save it. And as it was public, I guess no one has privacy issues, but this would just allow me to come back to the questions, to your names and so on. So yeah. And Felipe Almeida, you asked how we can contact you directly. I just left the contacts into the chat box. So if you go to Zoom, you just can find actually all the information there. But you can also go on infranodus.com and go into the About section at the bottom, and there are all the contact details there. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to leave it here and see you soon.